Hello friends, and welcome back to my page, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made. I am Mia, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about boundaries with your friends. And I just want to say thank God for putting these beautiful women in my life who so graciously agreed to allow me to record our last hangout. This is my first time doing a voiceover video, so definitely give me grace. But with that being said, in this video, I'm going to discuss different boundary types and different friendship conflicts that arise, how to handle them, and I'll wrap up with some frequently asked questions. I went over in my video entitled When to Say Yes, How to Say No. In this video, we discuss compliance, who are people who say yes to the bad, which simply means people pleasing, not wanting to rock the boat, and going along with things even if they're not necessarily good for you. The second personality type was avoidance, who say no to the good, which may present as people who don't allow people to get close enough to help them, who don't accept help when people are offering it, or someone who's always helping other people but does not allow people to do things for them in return. In the second video, Navigating Narcissism, How to Say No, I discussed the last two personality types, which are controllers, people who don't hear no, which most often presents as narcissists or manipulative people, as well as non-responsives who don't hear yes. Now, that simply means someone who doesn't understand when the people in their life are communicating the way that they need to be loved, and they're not saying yes to love. Those are the 4 different personality types in summation. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about them, understanding them a little bit more, be sure to go back and check out those 2 videos. But I do just want to preface by saying friends in the context of this video means non-romantic or attachment-based relationships. And what I mean by that is not someone that you're interested in dating or possibly having a romantic relationship with. And by attachment base, I mean work, school, church, etc. Something other than the actual relationship that attaches you to this person. But with all that being said, I will be going over 3 different relationship types. So feel free to look over the chapters. If there's a certain relationship advice that you're looking for, they are labeled by the personality to personality, or you can continue listening through all of the different boundary conflicts and boundary types just for tips and tricks in your relationships or for the future. But with all that being said, if you haven't already, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to my page, and make sure your post notifications are on because I do post at least 3 videos a week, 1 on Wednesday, 1 on Thursday, and 1 today on Faith Fridays. Now diving right into the first relationship type, we have compliance and compliance. Now this simply means 2 people who don't know how to say no, and most often what you'll see is neither of them actually gets to do what they want. They may have agreed to go out, for instance, but now they both want to stay in, and because they have this compliant personality type, neither of them will say anything to the other person, and they both end up going out and not being happy about it. So you will notice that for all of the different boundary types and boundary relationships, all of the questions are the same. So here's the checklist that will help you locate the boundary issue as well as guide you through solving them. The first question is, what are the symptoms? In this case, symptoms will probably look like anger, anxiety, a sense of unease, disappointment, and dissatisfaction. Because both people in this relationship are compliant, they probably will both be experiencing the same symptoms. Question number 2, what are the roots? In this case scenario, the roots may be that each of them struggle with anxiety. Maybe you had controlling parents, or maybe you were in a controlling relationship that essentially installed this thought or feeling in you that you couldn't say no. Now the third question is, what is the boundary conflict? So all of the boundary conflicts will be a violation of one of the 10 laws of boundaries. So if you haven't already checked out the laws of boundaries video, that would definitely be helpful in understanding which boundary or which law of boundary is being broken. So in this situation, the boundary conflict would be the law of exposure. The law of exposure simply says that it is our responsibility to put on display what our boundaries are, things we like, things we don't like. And when that doesn't happen, often people will step on your boundaries or overstep because they're not really sure what your boundaries are because they aren't exposed. But if that is something that you're a little confused about or would like to learn a little bit more about, be sure to drop down below in the comments. Let me know if you guys have any questions. You can also check out the 2 videos that I did on the laws of boundaries. The law of exposure, I believe, is in the second video. Moving on to question number 4. Who needs to take ownership? In this case, both people need to take ownership. Each person is responsible for their own backpack. And if that's a confusing term, definitely be sure to check out my videos on what is in your backpack, but that simply means that you are responsible for the things that are on your property. Your property is your feelings, your emotions, your beliefs, your values, your wants, your needs. All of those things are in your bag, and we are all called to carry our own load. So, question number 5, what do you need? In this case, it would probably be helpful to get a mentor or a coach, a counselor, to get involved in a small group. People that are going to be encouraging you in the word, people that are going to be equipping you with resources, as well as following up with you and holding you accountable for making small changes in your day-to-day life. Question number 6, how to begin? This is probably the biggest question, but the most simple. Start small. Be honest with the small things. If you don't want to go out, simply say, I don't want to go out. No biggie. Practice doing the tiny things. When you go to the gym for the first time, we're not picking up the 50-pound dumbbells. We're picking up the 5-pound or the 10 pounds, and eventually you work your way up 15, 20, 25. Don't start with super huge things, overwhelm yourself, and then shut down when someone reacts poorly or because you haven't built up that muscle. That is how you get hurt. Now, the 7th question is how to set boundaries. This is also very commonly asked questions, but in this case, it is probably best to set the boundaries face to face because both of you are compliant and struggle with anxiety. If this is something that's done over text, things might get lost in translation, someone might get offended, their feelings might get hurt. So I definitely would encourage you to have this conversation with your friend face to face, full of truth, full of grace. Now the last question, what's next? Or rather, what happens now? In most cases, your relationship with your friend is going to be strengthened. Start saying no to things that you don't want to do. And this may mean that you need to get more friends, or maybe it means you need another friend because it might be that you like going out to coffee and your friend doesn't like coffee at all, which is completely fine. If you guys both still love going to the movies, you can still fulfill that need and have that recreational time together and bond together doing things that you both mutually like, and then you could simply get another friend to go out to coffee with. Next up, we have a compliant with a controller, and this could be an aggressive controller or a manipulative controller. This is probably one of the most identifiable conflict problems, and one where one person in the relationship feels intimidated or inferior. They're often being exploited by the other person, and it's typically very obvious. And the other person sometimes is really oblivious. In their mind, they have the I need it attitude, where it's like, well, I just needed your keys, or I just needed money, or I just needed 3 hours of your time. And that's then the excuse for exploiting the relationship, which leads me to the first question. What are the symptoms? Now, if you are the compliant in the relationship, you're probably feeling controlled and resentful, and you may or may not be avoiding this person. Whereas the controller in this situation typically feels good. They probably feel pestered by the compliance complaining or by their lack of a joyful attitude, and it may not be something they're even doing intentionally, but it is still their responsibility to not take the relationship for granted. And this may even be driven by a sense of entitlement. Maybe they never face their own irresponsibility. Maybe their parents always help them with writing school papers or paying their debts and things like that. those could be some of the roots that drive this problem with the controller, which leads me into the second question. What are the roots? For a controller, the roots are probably that they never learned delayed gratification or responsibility, whereas for the compliant in this relationship, they probably learned to avoid conflicts and to just go with the flow, and that's honestly what breeds people pleasers and why compliants often end up in relationships with controllers, because they don't get out or recognize that they're saying yes to evil before their feelings get involved and they're in the relationship too deeply. Now, the third question, what is the boundary conflict here? So again, all of the boundary conflicts are going to be one of the 10 laws of boundaries. So for the compliant, the law of boundary that they're breaking here is the law of proactivity. It is our responsibility to be proactive in standing up for what we believe, standing up for what we like and who we are, and to be proactive about setting boundaries before the next time something happens. Now, for the controller, they're breaking the law of respect. If you want someone to respect your boundaries, you must be willing to respect their boundaries, and things like not planning ahead and dumping all of your responsibilities onto the compliant just because you know that they'll be there and they'll have your back is really exploiting the relationship and breaking the law of respect, because let the tables turn for one incident and it would be a problem. So, question number 4, who needs to take ownership? Again, both people in this relationship need to take ownership. And honestly, and this question might be better asked as, what do you need to take ownership for? Because ownership is typically a root issue of all of the friendship boundary conflicts, because both people in a friendship need to understand that, just like in a marriage or any other attachment-based relationships, that each person is responsible for carrying their own bag. The controller needs to take ownership of their desire to control other people. And as a compliant, you need to take ownership of seeing yourself as a victim. You are not a victim to this relationship. Which leads me to question 5. What do you need? In this situation, I would highly suggest getting a mentor or a life coach, a counselor. Definitely get into a small group of like-minded women that can lead you, that can encourage you, that can equip you and be there for you to help guide you through setting healthy, biblically based boundaries. Which leads me to question number 6, how to begin. In this case, I would encourage you, begin with prayer. Prayer for strength and guidance. Learn the skill of disagreeing, learn the skill of sharing your opinion, and of confronting people in full truth and full grace. This is not something that you want to start practicing on the controller, because 9 times out of 10, they're probably going to manipulate the situation, end up making you feel like crap, or something along those lines. So these are skills that you want to develop in those healthy relationships, in those small groups with people that you know are going to respect your no, so you can build that muscle. Probably the most popular conversation for this friendship type is, how do you set boundaries? In this situation, a dialogue for a very simple and clear boundary is, if you are nasty to me, then I will leave. If you are intimidating me, then I will leave. If you yell at me, then I will leave. If you are cussing at me, then I will leave. You want to sit down, have this conversation with them, share how you're feeling, use I statements, use truth, say it in grace. But in Matthew 18, the Bible instructs us to go to this person one-on-one, being proactive and telling them what you stand for using I statements. If this is a relationship that you don't want to end and the one-on-one conversation doesn't go well, then you can bring another person, maybe 2 other people, have a conversation with them. If this person is a Christian, It shouldn't have to get any further than this, but if you're still interested in the relationship and the person doesn't really seem to see reason, then go before the church, call up a pastor, go in on a Sunday, set up a meeting, and if all of those steps fail, then it might be time to just pause for the relationship. It doesn't mean that you have to close this door indefinitely. It just means that this is not a healthy relationship for you right now, and maybe at some point in the future, just like the prodigal son, they might have a come to Jesus moment, the Holy Spirit might do a work in them, and the two of you might be able to regain your friendship at a later point in a different season. Which leads me to the last question: what happens next? The next step would really be to set some ground rules and to just establish that rules are not a bad thing. Rules are a framework. Rules are like a trellis. They are there to help allow things to grow and to shape the way that they will be formed. And this will help you build a new relationship with your friend. But I'd be remiss not to point out that this will either deepen the friendship and allow the two of you to thrive together, or it might dissipate the relationship like we just talked about. But before we move on to the last friendship conflict, I do just want to add that setting boundaries in relationships is not the same as setting ultimatums. Ultimatums are typically forceful, they're threats, they're used in an attempt to control the other person. That is the heart posture behind an ultimatum. The heart posture behind healthy, biblically based boundaries is all about personal power. It is about setting limits for yourself and what is around you. This is not from a place of anger or judgment or blame. This is simply about fleeing from evil and guarding your heart. It is about you, which is why we use I statements and not blaming other people or trying to force them to change. If they want to have a relationship with you, these are things you tolerate around yourself. They can change or not. This isn't something you're forcing. This isn't a threat. Now, next we have the compliant with the non-responsive. And honestly, this is probably one of the worst friendships because compliants say yes to the bad, non-responsives say no to loving well. So, diving right into the questions, what are the symptoms? If you are the non-responsive in this relationship, you're probably feeling guilty, overwhelmed, confused. 9 times out of 10, non-responsives are not really aware of how to love people well, and they feel like they are. So when people are complaining and saying that they're not being loved well by them, non-responsives are typically confused and very overwhelmed by this information. But if you're the compliant in this relationship, more than likely you're going to be feeling depressed, resentful. You typically feel very unimportant to this person, and it really just hinders your overall view of yourself and your relationship. Question number 2, what are the roots? For the non-responsive, this could have come from the fact that you were a popular person. Maybe you have the ability to be the passive friend, meaning you don't have to work for your friendships. People are constantly reaching out to you, constantly asking you if you want to hang out. You typically are not the person who's reaching out to people, asking them if they want to hang out, asking to be invited to parties or things like that, because people are always reaching out to you. Whereas if you're the compliant in this relationship, you're probably filled with fear of losing the friend. This might be someone who is popular or somebody who you feel makes you look cool by being friends with them, so you don't want to lose the relationship. Or maybe it's someone you've just had a relationship with for a long time, so that's why you don't want to lose the relationship. But moving on to the third question, what's the boundary conflict? All of the boundary conflicts are laws of boundaries. So for the non-compliant, the law of activity is the boundary that is being broken here, which simply means that it's your responsibility to take initiative. All of us should be equally taking initiative. There shouldn't be a relationship that's heavy one way, heavy the other way. And yes, relationships go through seasons. So it may be a season where maybe you just had a baby and that's why you're non-responsive. But if you've always been non-responsive in this relationship, you gotta start thinking outside of yourself. You have to start putting others above you and really just learning how to love other people well. If you're the compliant, the law of responsibility says to let them carry their own own load. You are not responsible for carrying their load, and they are responsible for loving others well. They're responsible for their love. You cannot carry that for them, so you need to put it down and allow them to carry that. You need to carry your own love. So trying to carry the love for both of you is too much, and it's not sustainable in the long term. Question number 4. Who needs to take ownership? Again, 9 times out of 10, the answer is both. You both need to take ownership. You both have your own bags to carry. For the non-responsive, you need to learn how to carry your load in the relationship. You need to learn how to love other people well. For the compliant, you need to learn how to stop enabling. You may need to realize that it may be a subconscious way of controlling the other person, that you don't want to lose the friendship, so instead of allowing them to carry their own load, you pick it up and you do all of the work in order to make them happy so that they don't stop being your friend, which is rooted in a fear and control. So question number 5, what do you need? You need support. You need other friends. You need to get into a small group and find other women that are going to love you well. Which leads me to question number 6, how to begin. Begin simply by practicing communicating how you feel. Begin by saying no to things that you don't want to do, and begin by setting healthy, biblically based boundaries in loving relationships so that you can build up the skill of saying no in this relationship as well. So you may be asking yourself question number 7, how to set boundaries. Boundary setting is what we are all about here. If this is something you're struggling with, be sure to check out my boundaries playlist for more tips and tricks. But my number one piece of advice for you here is to just communicate your boundaries. Take responsibility for yourself and communicate the things that you will not be taking responsibility for. This may sound something like, hey Lexi, I love you. I love our friendship. I love hanging out. I just feel like I am doing all of the reaching out, and it's really disappointing when a long time goes by and it doesn't really seem like you're interested in seeing me. I would love if you'd reach out to me and initiate hanging out, or if you would plan something nice for us to do. If not, that's okay. We just probably won't be hanging out as often. Now, however you have this conversation, just be sure to state what you're looking for from the other person, how you're feeling, and what you're going to do or not do. In this situation, maybe it's just that you're not going to always be reaching out to them every single day to see if they're available. It might just be that instead of reaching out to them 3 times a week, you're going to reach out to them 1 time a week. So the last question, what's next? Either A, the relationship will be strengthened, or B, you'll learn that this wasn't actually a mutual connection to begin with. Now I know that was a lot and you guys might have some questions, so I'm just going to go through some frequently asked questions that may clear things up. You may be asking yourself, aren't friendships easily broken? And if I follow these steps, then I won't have any friends. And what I'd say to that is this question is based on a problematic assumption, which is that external institutions like marriage, work, and church are the glue that are holding together relationships, as if we don't have a choice or that we aren't committed to each other based on factors outside of our institutionalized commitments. What holds relationships together is Christ. We are befriending people out of the overflow of love, not out of obligation, which is shaky at best, because we aren't called to be fair weather friends, and we cannot depend on our own willpower to maintain relationships. It is a choice and a commitment in the overflow of love. And this does not mean that friendships are weaker than institutionalized relationships. It just means that we need to learn to trust love, to trust God, and to trust that our bonds with our friends are not easily broken. Boundaries are not meant to destroy relationships. They are meant to grow and strengthen your love for one another. The next question you might be thinking about is how to set boundaries in dating. While this video is about friendship and not about dating, it is just important to note that relationships are for finding someone to complement you for your life. And typically when we're immature, we go to relationships to find someone to heal us or to help us grow, and we think that limits aren't necessary, and we ignore them and we ignore boundaries, which is a huge red flag. Having healthy, biblically based relationships with the same sex is so vital to marriage. So in your dating relationships, just one piece of encouragement is not to tell your boyfriend something you haven't told your best girlfriend. At this point, you don't want your boyfriend to be your entire world. That is how people get wrapped up into relationships that they shouldn't be in and feeling like they're stuck because no one else in the world knows them. Which leads me to my next question. What if my closest friends are my family? With this question, I would just encourage you that our purpose is to go out and to spread the word to all the nations. And this is hard to do if you are not free to leave the same street, city, or state that you grew up in. You want to make sure that you've forged your own values, your own beliefs and convictions, and not that you're just mimicking those of your family. We are called to question our beliefs. And if your closest friends are your family, we should just be asking ourselves, is that because we are afraid of separating from them and becoming autonomous adults? Or is it because we haven't really put ourselves out there enough? We are better together. And in the Habits of Household book that I am reading, in addition to this, I just read that children who grow up in Christian households where there's someone outside of the bloodline who's also a follower that is involved in your child's life, that the children are then a lot more likely to continue in the values that their parents taught them if they see that it's not just something that their bloodline believes in, that it is a community of believers. We are meant to be the entire body of Christ and not to just isolate ourselves with the same people that we know. With that being said, the last question I'll go over is how to set boundaries with needy friends. Now to this I will also say, ask yourself, are you making friendships or are you starting mini ministries? Because these are definitely different things. And what I mean by a ministry relationship is throwing yourself into a relationship where somebody needs something. If every single one of your relationships is a ministry relationship, you'll probably lead to feeling isolated and super burned out. Because yes, we should be pouring out, but we also need to be poured into. So be sure to be asking yourself all of the questions that we went over today. What are the symptoms? What are the roots? What's the boundary conflict? Who needs to take ownership? What do you need? How to begin? How to set boundaries? And what's next? My challenge for you guys is to just take a prayerful look at your friendships and make proper adjustments. Drop down below in the comments and let me know how long your longest friendship is, and be sure to share this video with your best friends. But until then, be blessed, and I'll see you guys next time.